We have another extraordinary panel for the rest of this session, and I'm going to let our panel introduce themselves, but first up is Roger Payne, and he went from collocating bats to a wonderful discovery that whales were actually singing. And anyway, I'm up on this panel, I should say, surrounded by what my mother would say are proper musicians too, of which we have a French horn player, I think, about to start. Right? The cellist. You're the cellist. See? Speaker number one, and I've already screwed it up, but here we go.
I also worked with Don Griffin, who's been mentioned several times, who is the inventor of the phrase to explain what happens to people as they get older. They reach, as he said, their philosophopause. In order to spare you from listening to an old man attempting to remember words, I'm going to read my remarks. I specialize in the behavior of baleen whales. However, today I want to speak about toothed whales, since I think there's a grand opportunity to use the internet to eavesdrop on their acoustic interactions. The late Stan Kusich, if I have that pronunciation correct, ran a fascinating experiment with two dolphins named Hector and Han. He taught them a collection of tricks: waving a flipper, blowing bubbles, making sounds in the air, jumping out of the water, and so on. But there was a twist. Every behavior they performed had to be something that they hadn't yet done in that particular session. Once they learned this task, Stan Kusich worked with Hector and Han together. He would then give them a signal to innovate, meaning that the two dolphins had to perform in unison some behavior that Kusich hadn't yet seen in that particular session. They got good at it. Following each command to innovate, they would dive down, whistle for a few moments, and then start the trick at exactly the same moment, performing together in what looked like very precise unison. When the trick was over, Kusich would signal again for them to innovate, and once more they would submerge, make lots of whistles, and then, in unison, perform a second trick that hadn't yet been done in that session. This would keep up until the dolphins had done 8 tricks in unison, at which point Kusich would end the session. He concluded that either one of them was imitating the other so closely and with so little delay that it looked like the tricks were performed simultaneously, or they were communicating something to each other about which trick to do next. I see this as a golden opportunity to test whether dolphins can communicate meaningful information to each other. If Henry and Han, or another pair with the same talent, were placed in different tanks in different buildings several miles apart, far enough that they could only hear and see each other via an electronic hookup, and in the tanks were placed equipment with high-fidelity underwater microphones, loudspeakers, TV screens, and cameras, they could communicate with sounds or body language, and you could see whether they could still perform identical tricks in unison. If they could, you could take the next step and find out whether they are communicating with sound, with body language, or with both, by seeing whether it was turning off the image or turning off the sound that caused them to stop synchronizing their tricks. Many people have tried to find out whether dolphins have a language, and currently, of course, as we've heard, most scientists believe they do not. However, that question is one of the most vexed in biology. I suggest that we leave it to the philosophers to resolve it and focus instead on finding out as much as we can about the lives of dolphins by asking them questions. Suppose, for example, that you taught a dolphin to press the keys on an underwater keyboard in which indicated, each key of which indicated a common emotion like anger, fear, affection, dislike, jealousy, curiosity, etc. I'm not talking about dolphins speaking words, just pressing keys or manipulating symbols that stand for those words. Once a dolphin is labeling emotions consistently, you put her in with a group of other dolphins and watch them interact. When you see a behavior whose motivation you don't understand, you ask the dolphin, "Why did you do that?" And hopefully she replies, "Fear," or "jealousy," etc. A protocol like this would give interesting insights into dolphin behavior and communication. Once your dolphin mastered this test, you could go on to show her videos of other dolphins, and while she was watching them, ask her, "Why is Santini doing that?" and hope for an answer such as anger or affection. If this worked, you might try asking dolphins direct questions. For example, do dolphins fear boats? Are sharks scary? Which of the following sharks is most scary? Is your mother afraid of sharks? Is your brother? Who is most afraid of sharks, you or your brother? You might next interview the subject's brother and ask him the same questions, or to gain broader insight, ask the same questions of all the individuals that you named in the previous questions and compare all of their answers. Or you could name several people the dolphins know and ask, "Who do you like most?" Or ask, "Who does your mother like most? You, your brother, your sister, your father, another male?" Depending on the answer, it might be interesting to ask the other male the same question. And when you have the answer, to tell your dolphin's mother what the other male said about her. Gossips often impart socially important information. Is it entirely unreasonable to suppose that the same may be true for dolphins? But by this process, you might find out if dolphins lie to each other regularly as humans do. I would be surprised, of course, if they did not, or indeed whether their whole social system is maintained by a web of lies, as are many of our social systems. The majority of the questions I've suggested, by the way, can be framed as preferences between two or more alternatives, something that dolphins learn to do very readily. There's another approach that might give us strong insights into the dolphin mind. Let me put it this way. It should be possible to some extent, to psychoanalyze a whale. For many years, there was a male orca, Hayek by name, in the Vancouver Aquarium, who liked looking at pictures of dolphins and other orcas. Biologist John Ford had in his office an underwater window into Hayek's tank. Whenever John held up a picture of an orca or a dolphin, Hayek would come over to investigate, often looking at it for minutes, first with one eye, then with the other. When his much smaller tank mate, a female named Giosa, who dominated Hayek entirely, when she saw Hayek looking intently at something, she would come over, push him aside, look herself for 2 or 3 seconds, and leave. Hayek would then return to the pictures and keep staring for minutes at any images that John showed him. Biologist David Bain and I visited 2 other orcas and tried holding up pictures of orcas and dolphins to them. They came over and looked for a couple of seconds, but neither displayed any obvious interest, and they soon left. Hayek has since died, but there may be other captive orcas with similar interests. If so, it would be interesting to give them access to the video sequences of orcas and dolphins. The video could be rigged to play in response to the whale pressing a lever. Eventually, the task would be changed so the whale had to push the lever several times to make the video keep running or to keep a particular still image in view. One could determine from this what subjects the whale worked hardest to see and at what moments in the action it lost interest and stopped pushing the lever, even though the action continued. Thus might we learn a great deal about what interests orcas. Orcas of the opposite sex, fish, orcas from the watcher's pod, orcas from different pods, orcas giving birth, orcas mating, other orcas seen from above water, in a view nominally afforded only during a spy hop or a breach? Do psychoanalysts know their human patients much better? Do analysts know their human patients as well? I know 2 dolphins who have been taught to take a paintbrush in their teeth and while sculling hard enough with their tails to keep their bodies held vertically out of the water to paint on a canvas held by their trainer. Having made a few strokes with the brush, the dolphin subsides and the water returns the brush to the trainer, is given a different brush with a different color and resumes painting. They're probably not doing their best work. It's as if you held a brush in your teeth while also balancing on a unicycle. Dolphin paintings sell for hundreds of dollars. I entered several in a London art show. They attracted more buyers and higher prices than did the abstract paintings made by the professional human artists whose paintings were bought. Imagine what a dolphin might paint if it had a few art lessons and could paint on one of Diana Reese's underwater touchpads. I believe dolphin art could give us a more enlightened appreciation of the entire wild world. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's your seat, too. Sorry, I was ready before.
This goes to Roger.
Okay.
Roger?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, I've got it.
So, although we're looking at communication, cognition, and there is this musical element, and perhaps the queen of biomusic is next up. In fact, she's created the Biomusic Research Initiative, Patricia Gray.
Okay, so I come strictly from the professional musical world, and I have intruded myself into the science world. And that began because I've been a professional concert pianist. I ended up being the artistic director of the resident chamber music ensemble at the National Academy of Sciences. I did that for over 21 years, and I was scooped up by a group of scientists who were engaged in animal communication because they had hit a lot of blind alleys, and they were interested in looking at music as a way into animal communication. And so I got pulled off the piano bench into doing research with other species. So I'm a highly trained conservatory type musician. I read music. It is a literary approach to music making. There are many classic systems of music around the world that all have their notation systems. And in order to be a trained musician, you have to learn how to read music. But this is not the way most music is made in this world. This is the way it's made. Come on, join in. When did you get the music? Did you have a rehearsal? So that's what I'm most interested in. What is the evolutionary trail of that is contained in our brains when we are born? I'm going to show you something. But first, let me explain something about biomusic. This is a quick and concise understanding of what I'm talking about. Contained within nature is all the stuff that we do musically. What I'm trying to do, and many others now, is to figure out how to understand what's there and articulate it. We saw a famous video this morning of Patricia and Peter Gabriel improvising, this is important, improvising a grooming song. It's a little unfortunate in my mind that we actually called it a song, but let me get back to that in a moment. What's particularly interesting to me is that Peter began an intro in what we musicians call D-Dorian mode. It's about 5-6 bars of intro before Patricia puts her fingers down on the two most important pitches within that modal scale, the tonic and the dominant. Every time I've played that video for a group of musicians, there's an audible gasp in the audience. It's unbelievable. The two most important pitches within that scale system are her very first musical statements. What continues in that process of doing it together is that she starts to move her fingers closer together and comes into a space that we now call the dominant. And Peter, being a very expert musician and improviser, senses where we're going, and he plays a dominant chord with her. And it's like a musical handshake. We're here together. And I think if I were improvising with Peter at that point, I would feel really positive about going on. So she goes on and breaks out the triad of the Dorian system and goes up to the top of the keyboard. Peter, sensing what is going on, is right with her, goes back to playing a D-Dorian area of harmonies around her. And she goes up to the top of the keyboard and she centers on, again, the dominant, but then goes and creates a little 3-note motif at the top, which she plays in multiple directions. So it can be A, C, B, B, C, A, C, A, B. It's all good. It's a motif that we humans use to expand musical conversation. And she comes down the keyboard. Peter is in this space with her. I mean, they are linked in this process. She starts, remember that place where she starts playing the alternating octaves? Every sensitive musician knows that when you increase what we call the internal speed of the beat by repeating that note, making it essentially more of something happening faster, that it feels like it's getting louder. An old technique actually from harpsichord playing. Peter reacts immediately by increasing his sound. He makes something called a crescendo. And she responds by playing louder. He starts getting louder as well. And so if you will remember, when they actually wind up that phrase, which is the end of the improv, she has, I think, gotten to the point where she has to play her fists in order to ride that crescendo. And in perfect timing, she points to the lexigram that says good. But it was rhythmic. It was right on the beat that she did, bam, good. So in an improv like that, we have two sentient beings who have come out of their walled space. They're meeting in an exploratory space. That's very special. It happens that music making is an exploratory phenomena. And you'll hear me now, I'm leaving behind the word music, because that is a human word. That's a human concept. It's a product. I'm talking about the process. Oh no, I'm out of time already. So it's a process, and that's where we need to go. Oh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have gotten so stuck. All right, so I want to get down here to how do we actually talk about music making in animal communication. Kanzi taught me synchronization. Start with that one. He and I absolutely improv'd against a glass wall on improvisation. Since then, we have discovered synchronized entrainment in a cockatoo. This is Snowball. Snowball learned to do this by interacting with his caregiver, but he's since been, I mean, we know that, that he synchronizes very nicely. We also have synchrony entrainment from, oops, I'm hoping this is going to load. Taking a while. Here we go. Sea lion, Ronan. Ronan can get faster. All right, just trust me, he can do this very, very fast. Okay, here I am with Inyota. All right, this is interesting because bonobos don't want to just do an isochronous beat. They want to do a rhythm, and that's what I wanted you to pay attention to here. This is not just with the beat. This is a rhythm. Okay. All right, this is Inyota. Now, the other thing about bonobos is they like to go faster than we do. And this is one of the things that we have to measure very carefully, because just because we like to synchronize at 120, they prefer 220. So when we're playing a 120 isochronous beat, Inyota's going to come in and he's going to create triplets, extremely fast triplets on top of that. Subdividing the beat. All right. So I said that we're born with this ability. So here's it. Okay. You're about to hear verbalization. Yeah, okay. All right, so nobody can teach this stuff. This is innate. This is a pathway in to understanding and relating, because this is a social relationship. This is all about socialization and using the musical sounds as a communication device. I am a veteran now of a curriculum that the National Science Foundation paid me to develop. And I've laid it on multiple children that brings them into this animal communication world through their musical innate capacities. This is what I'm interested in when it comes to the Interspecies Internet. It's one thing for us to connect only other species, but it's important to bring children into this experience as well. Because when we all do music together, especially synchronous music together, it releases a neuropeptide in our brains. Changed your life because it's something called oxytocin, and it's an affinitive stimulant. So that's why it's important. I'm sorry I didn't mean to take so much time. Okay.
Talking about the way in, one way in is the interface, and next up is a sort of master of interface design with Mozilla Firefox and the Center for Humane Technology, and now the Earth Species Project is Aza Raskin.
Thanks, Peter. How do we?
Let's see. If you do Keynote more than me, I think we have the displays switched.
Let's play with things. Let's see what happens. Oh, this is exciting. Yeah, we could turn that off. And if we turn off next slide, it says.
No, we're in a bad. Let's see, we're in a strange mirroring mode. I think what we want to do is go back to the display, the settings, and we want to do the display settings and just mirror.
There it is.
In case anyone suspected it was pre-recorded. This is live.
This is, by the way, how to get good at computers. If you're just constantly emitting bosons that make computers stop working, you're forced. Yeah. Hello, human beings. How are you guys doing? Yeah? It is such a privilege, honestly, to be here. And it's interesting. There are many different walks of life coming together. So invent, I guess, and you got to invent the internet. My dubious claim to fame is that I invented infinite scroll, which I calculated recently wastes 200,000 human lifetimes per day. So this is my attempt at atoning. But I wanted to talk about thoughts on how would you translate an animal language, and that's sort of the question of like, how do you translate a language without a Rosetta Stone? Because it's sort of the equivalent of me saying, giving you a book in one language you don't understand, a set of magazines in a different language you don't understand, and even though you don't speak either language and there are no examples of how to translate, you can now translate. And I've been thinking about this for almost 8-9 years, and something happened in 2017 which made it go from being impossible to something that was possible and people were doing. And so I want to walk you guys through that so you can start to think in the way that AI does. So the big thing in trying to do any of this unsupervised translation are giving computers the task of sort of fill in the, yeah, that's what we're getting computers to do. And what's surprising is just filling in the blank teaches the computer a whole bunch. So the first thing to think about with neural nets is that they have these multiple layers, and each layer is learning a succinct vocabulary to describe that data set. And so, the first layer of a neural net, if you're training it on images, learns to detect edges. And then the next layer up learns to detect textures, and then patterns, and then parts, and then objects. And what's cool about this is that means even though all you've done to train this up is just ask the computer to predict some missing part of an image, or in a movie, what comes next, is that it's learning to describe this data set well. So here's an example. where a neural net has learned to identify eyes. So it's sort of higher up in the neural net, and one neuron is learning to detect those weird sort of eyes on the left. A different neuron is figuring out the eyes on the right, and you can sort of see how it moves between them. And this means when you show it novel things, it can actually describe it really quickly, because it's sort of this kind of eye with a furry ear over here. But it gets even more interesting to me, because the fill-in-the-blank tasks start to extract really rich semantic information. So this is from an OpenAI paper in 2017, where all they trained a computer to do was to predict what is the next character of an Amazon review. Fine. But what they discovered is that there was one neuron in that net that was doing best in the world sentiment analysis. Why would it do that? Well, it's because one of the vocabularies to describe human beings' speech is how they're feeling. And so it's starting to extract how human beings are feeling, their affective state. So that I thought was super cool. Okay, so AI learns succinct vocabularies at multiple hierarchical levels of scale. Deep learning really does just one other kind of thing, and it's the one weird trick. And that it can take pretty much any data set, sets of faces or words, and it can map them to points in space in a sort of clever way, which is to say, let's say you're mapping faces. The faces as points in space, if they're close, the faces are going to look sort of similar. And then the dimensions, the axes, have meaning. They're just really hard to interpret. So I want to talk about this shape in particular is English. This is the top 10,000 most spoken words in English. It's normally in 300 dimensions, but that's a little hard for me, so I projected it down to 3 dimensions. Every point in this space is a word, and analogies are represented geometrically. So king is to man as woman is to queen. So in the space, king is the same distance directed to man as woman is to queen, as girl is to princess, as boy is to prince. And what's cool is that you can just start doing arithmetic. So king minus man equals princess minus girl. So king minus man plus girl equals princess. You can just try it. The very first thing I did when I got my hands on a data set like this is I did, okay, how about hipster minus authenticity plus conservative, and that equaled electability, which is a funnier joke than I can write. Right? But when you start thinking geometrically, all sorts of cool things start just popping out. You know, you rotate it, and like man is to princess, woman is to princess, just falls out geometrically. Some other really cool things. There's a direction that you can go to correct spelling errors, which is interesting. There's a spelling correctness direction. You can actually just do, in this space, reliable minus a misspelled version, reliable plus foreign, misspelled, equals the correctly spelled version of foreign, which I just think is rad. Other things, there's a pretentious vector. So if you do malodorous minus smelly and you add that to clever, it'll equal adroit. Right, so it's really starting to pull out some very rich semantic information, even though we never taught it what anything meant. This is just looking at it, trying to predict what word comes next and say, computer, assume that words are points in space. So here was the breakthrough in 2017. It says, build one of these shapes for one language, say Japanese. Then build this shape for another language, say German. You ask, well, how similar are these two shapes? And the deeply surprising thing is that you can just take one of these shapes, say for Japanese, and do a hard rotation, not even squishing it, just physically rotate it. And if you sort of blur your eyes, the two shapes for the languages sort of match up to a place you can do actually quite good translations. And even more surprising is that it didn't just work for Japanese and English, it worked for German and for Turkish and for Esperanto and for Finnish, which is a really weird language. Even though we would imagine that the way that we represent the world is deeply context and culture dependent, this still works. The question is, of course, why? Now we're into theory land, but my theory is, language is a model of the world and how we feel about it. And if you think about language as a kind of style, then maybe German is a little bit like pointillism, and Russian is a little bit like brutalism. I hope I don't get in trouble for these things. But even though the textures are different, and the paintbrushes are different, and the colors are different, they're still representing the same world, and the relationships within that world are the same. And so what this is doing is it's pulling out the underlying analogic structure of the world. Now, of course, the next thing you're probably going to say is like, yeah, fine, I believe you that this works for all human languages. Maybe humans have a universal meaning space, but the Umwelt of an animal might be completely different than ours, which is true. Although maybe they still have up and down and light and dark and hungry and not hungry. So there's a lot that is conserved about our experiences. Oh yeah, I forgot. It actually, because you can use so much data, these unsupervised techniques are now sometimes at par and sometimes beating the supervised techniques, which I think is neat. It's a little unfair because it's just more data. And this technique is already being used. So if you Google and Facebook are both using these aligned vector spaces where you have 90 languages in sort of one unified space, it's just efficient. So they're using it. This isn't theoretical anymore. Yes, and then there's this really cool paper, I think it was out of CSAIL, at the end of last year, because everything I've talked about is just translating text to text, but no one had yet been able to listen to, say, German, and then translate it to written French, and that's now possible. And this happened late last year, and it's super exciting, at least for me, because this is exactly what you need to do to start really tackling animal language if you had a big enough data set. And it's all unsupervised. Not even asking questions like, how do you segment? That happens unsupervised too. Okay, so we've now talked about language-to-language translation, but this is why I think these techniques might work even if the Umwelt of a creature is completely different than ours. And that is, there's a paper in 2013 from Google called Devise, and they were looking at how do you translate images into words. Here was the task they wanted to do. Can I show you an image that you've never seen before, or the AI has never seen before, of a kind of thing it's never seen before, without being explicitly taught the word for the thing, and it has to return the right word. And computers can do that, which is surprising. So here's how it works. Instead of taking a neural net and just training it to be like, okay, here's an image of a rabbit. Sorry, that's my attempt at drawing a rabbit. But if you take a rabbit, and instead of just returning the word for rabbit, you return the point in space, which is rabbit. And then you train the same neural net, so you have a cat and a human, and you say, don't return just the word for it, you return the point in space, which is cat and human. Same things for cars and trucks. And then you show it something new, like a dog. It returns a point in space which is very close to dog. Sometimes it's dog on the nose. Why? Because the images are also a model of the world, just like language. And you're teasing apart the relationships. The concept of cat and dog are much closer together than cat and truck. Images of cats and dogs are closer together than images of cats and trucks. When you look at the set of all relationships, it's sort of this rigid structure, like when you, as a kid, had to solve the puzzles of like, Alice sits next to Bob, but Bob doesn't sit next to Jeff, and Jeff, right? It creates a rigid structure. 1 minute, okay. So this is fascinating to me because it's showing that even if you have different senses, you can still map into one unified space, and that gives hope that we can start to tease apart and build ourselves a Rosetta Stone. Another just really fun one in here is you can go backwards. So this is doing the thing before of saying a tench, which is, I believe, a type of fish, plus net. So these are the vector, the points in space. You take the average, so you go in the middle, and then you look up what image is closest, and out comes a fish in a net, which I think is rad, yeah. Other things that you can do these same kinds of embeddings to look at the videos of a human being speaking, in this case John Oliver, put it into a point in space, associate that point in space with the kinds of hand gestures a person does, and do a translation from audio to hand gestures. And so that's what this is. You feed in a clip of audio, and the computer outputs John Oliver's hand gestures. I think this just, immediately when you see this, you're like, oh, I can see how to start using this for animal behavior. If we have video and audio, then you start saying, can I predict with some audio from the animal what the behavior was, or given a behavior, can I predict what the audio was? And how good the predictions are going to tell you a lot about that model, how the animal's thinking or working. Start doing translation. And then I also think this is both fascinating and terrifying. These exact same techniques, it's all coming from a field called unsupervised sequence-to-sequence translation, works just as well in our fMRI, our brainwaves. So this was from this year, and they were able to, after training a system of showing like some object, seeing what the brainwaves were and using that to predict what the human was seeing, we're able to reconstruct the face that people are seeing purely from fMRI data, which is both rad and terrifying, which is what I think describes the future. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see it. You have. Oh, there you are. Sorry, the other very smart creator of this amazing Earth species project had dreamt this amazing thing up. Was originally one of the founding teams of Twitter and brings a very different approach. But please welcome Britt Selvitelle.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm really honored to be here with all of you. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a paleontologist, and I used to have those tiny cards of dinosaurs on them. I don't know, you might remember these. They were collectible cards. My dad would get them for me when we would go to the Smithsonian together. The goal was to collect all of the extinct species. And when I was a kid, I also wanted to play with computers. And I did that. I got a degree in mathematics and computer science. And then I started working on a small side project that would become Twitter. And I got to work on human communication. I never got to be a paleontologist, but I am now working on extincting species. And I sometimes wonder what species might be on the cards that my kids or your kids might play with in 10 or 20 years. Let's talk about that briefly. This is not news to anyone in the room, but I think it's worth touching lightly nonetheless. 60% of primates are imminently extincting, and 75% of primates are declining at an unsustainable rate. These are our closest relatives. They are linked to our past, and when they're gone, there's going to be answers that we won't be able to ask questions about. And it's not just land. The latest IPCC report, of course, states that 80% of coral reefs are going to be gone, or 80% of coral reefs will be gone in about 10 years. So the way I like to think about this conceptually is that if you were a kid born today, by the time you could get your scuba license, there would be relatively no coral reefs left to see. This means that we are the last witnessing generation of coral. And in the background, global climate change is accelerating on all fronts. So what do we do? How do we retain hope today? Empathy, of course, is such a human lever, right? We've seen this time and time again. We see this with the work of Roger and Katie Payne, who recorded the songs of the humpback whale. This work went onto Voyager 1 as a representation of the human species. It completely transformed the way we thought about the oceans and kicked off the oceanic preservation movement. Stuart Brand, his work on the Earth selfie, kicked off the environmental movement. This kind of let us see the Earth for the first time. Not to mention the work of somebody like Jane Goodall, who showed that humans weren't the tool-using species of the planet. But now we're the language-using species of the planet. And when you look back in time, you see that a lot of shifts happen when somebody who doesn't have a voice gains voice. But that's not what we're working on here. We're not working on giving voice. We're trying to become better listeners. So how do we use the latest in technology and new tools in AI to become better listeners? So this is what we're working on. We're working on decoding the first non-human language. We think that this can be done in the window of around 5 to 10 years. And as Aza spoke about, one of the big thoughts is, how do you decode a language without a Rosetta Stone when you have no parallel data and no idea what the language is about? This is an intuition we have on how you might start to think about this problem, but it's in no way the totality of the research that we're doing. With this project, we're really asking people to remove their human glasses as much as possible. We may not even have the sensory organs to feel and understand the communications of another species. So when you build these sorts of language models, some of the really interesting stuff that you get to do is kind of towards your point about music. You get to say, okay, well, if I can project a language into this universal meaning space, because it's independent of the type of thing that's being projected into it, you can start to say, well, do these communications look more like the human experience of language or music or even images? We can start to gradiate over these different spaces and not think of language as simply a binary operation. So we have 3 pillars. As Aza mentioned, we're doing AI research. We have an in-house AI research team that we're building. The next 2 things are Species X and culture change. Species X are a series of tracks where we take individual species and we do 2 things really. One is we try to collect a massive amount of existing data that people have been doing in the field and have that in one place. The second part of this is, how do we record new, context-rich, high-fidelity recordings to do these sorts of analyses on? This is something that nobody's really done before in the space. An example of this, some examples of this might be Whale X or Corvid X or Dolphin X. Whale X, we're working on a collaboration with a number of people, some people here in the room like David Gruber, where we met in Harvard in April to start to think about questions like, what's the existing data we have for sperm whales, for example? And how do we collect the totality of communications of a pod for a season? And this is a very hard challenge because normally a tag falls off in a couple of days. Whale sheds skin 400 times that of a human. And we're just beginning to move into the primate space. So we're brainstorming with primatologists about what we do here. Another side benefit of this work is that we get to create this sort of living library of the behavioral kind of cultural identities of different species. And the way I like to think about this is that we have genomics data, and if we were to resurrect a human in 500 years or something like that, we would have all the anatomy of a human, but no idea of how it walks in the world or moves or speaks. And it's sort of the same with the genomics data we're preserving now. So we need to preserve and collect this rich biodiverse data about species. And then last is culture change. And this is one of the very hardest things. It's how do we get people to think differently about other species on the planet? We're partnering with some of the world's absolutely best storytellers to brainstorm this. For example, Luis C. Hoyos, who did The Cove and Racing Extinction, and really notably projected images of extincting species onto buildings from the Vatican to all over New York. This is, I believe, one of the most viewed things in human history, and it certainly shifted the way people thought about extincting species. So what we think about when we look at these tools is that we have a sort of new telemicroscope of analyzing data and what we're looking at. And one of our intuitions is that the telescope showed us that the Earth was not at the center of the universe. And perhaps we can learn that humanity is not at the center of the universe. So in summary, we are not great stewards of the planet, and it's a very challenging problem. But there's new insights that we have into how we might start thinking about our relationships with other species on the planet. One thing I like to reflect on sometimes is if the work of Roger and others, just hearing humpbacks sing, created the entire oceanic preservation movement, what could their words possibly do? So that's what we're all about. Please find myself or Aza with questions. We'll be here all day. Thank you very much for your time.
Great, thanks. Well, we're extremely fortunate to have, along with Roger here, another legendary pioneer who touched the world with the sign language and her interactions with Coco, Michael, and Ndume, and needs really no introduction. Penny Patterson.
Thank you, and I'm honored to be invited. And I've got something on here. I don't know.
It's a little too low down.
It's too low down. It's gonna get my hair interference.
All right.
So maybe better to use the podium.
Well, okay, why don't we do that?
So if you drop the lab audio and go to the podium.
Anyway, it's complicated to get off. Let's see. So, what I'd like to do is to let Coco tell her own story. There's only 10 minutes, so I would be way too wordy and it would take too long. But some of you may not know that Hanabiko, fireworks child, born on the 4th of July in 1971, passed away on June 19th of 2018. But she left an amazing legacy, and a lot of people say she's still hanging around to help us out. So let's see. We've got these. Okay, my screen looks a little different than what's showing.
That's what's showing. That's what's coming.
Okay.
Next, and just the arrow keys.
Okay, great. So I'm interested in continuing and expanding interspecies communication with all the species. We have, Coco plus Kanzi and Washoe and Chantek, the orangutan and parrots. Amazing things are happening in all those fields. And we'd really like to see it continue. What I'm going to just do here is give you a little relief from these charts. And because I've got another one coming here. This is just that with the work that we've done, we've discovered that total communication, sign language plus English, yielded a lot of interesting expansions of the language sharing, with the gorillas doing a lot of the expanding. This is just some sign language, and here are some of Coco's favorite signs. Let's see if we can move along to what we've done with those signs, or are trying to create what's called the Coco app. And there's Coco would be demonstrating the signs if you looked it up by word, or if you looked it up by category. Say, what are the signs that happen on the chest? There she is signing gorilla. And also we have topics like conservation. Michael, who was the victim of poaching of his family, watched his mother die. We learned that when we asked him to tell us about his mother. And at one point, we videotaped the answer to that question. On a brighter note, Ndume, who also joined our group, likes to have fun. So, and he plays with his signs. Okay, now we have some early footage of Coco. And the topic that Peter wanted me to bring up, because it is fascinating, is what gorillas do, just like children, is they coin new terms or names. And we just picked some illustrations for this one, where these are all Cocos, I believe, or maybe one of them's Michael's. Michael did the same thing. This is a list of some of the things that each one came up with. The one I like is Trouble Surprise for Crazy. So these things, their development was very much like children in terms of being creative when they came across something that they had not yet learned a word for. Another thing we did, you may have been to the doctor's office, I have, where they give you the pain chart, and they say, okay, how are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? This turned out to be a useful way for Coco to communicate when things were going on, either physically, for the pain chart, or emotionally, or the emotion chart, and she was able to use it. We also created a body chart so that Coco could identify places that might be troubling her for various reasons. Looks like this might have been a headache day with a stomach upset, perhaps. But she was able to mark the cards and my drawings usually to tell us about what was going on inside physically, and it helpful for diagnosis. Actually, when Coco developed an abscess, I asked her, well, do you need more medicine or do you need an operation? And she told me she needed an operation, and in fact, the tooth needed to be pulled. And during the period with the gorillas development, we used plenty of books. It started with children's books that got more sophisticated, Carl Sagan books, things like that seemed to held interest. Coco was interested in her own book, but when she saw pictures of Allball, even I know 15 plus years later, she would sign sad, cry, frown. She was still mourning her kitten. Then we had some videos donated. It came to us in various ways, and Coco's favorite was actually Awakenings with Robin Williams. And that had, she requested that one many, many times. She also seemed to be interested in dogs that talk, or aliens that talked, but also she liked the more spiritual movies as well. And she was watching Tea with Mussolini. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that one. At a point where this is the part where he's going off to school. Almost turning her back. This is a sad scene. Rebecca goes away and they all kiss him goodbye. Oh, honey, it is kind of disgusting. They have courage, honey. You have courage? You have courage? You have very courage. Good. Is there something I can do for you? Oh, honey, it's sad. I know it's a sad scene. Oh, they're crying. They are crying on the movie. Oh, honey. And there's trouble sad, trouble bad. Oh, sweetie, with the mother, yes, the sweet mother, the one who adopted him. Sweet. Well, I know. It's hard to watch that, so you didn't want to. And Coco also showed interspecies empathy with animals that might have gotten in her area. And this one is a tree frog. And earlier on, a tree frog got into Michael's room. Somehow these guys are getting in the room, and he was using the killing motion to chase it away. So Coco may have witnessed that as well as me. I did. She took special care letting this frog go in a space where he would not be able to get to it, in between three boulders. So took him outside and let him go. And then there's more here about art. The reason I'm bringing this up is that Coco wasn't the only artist or even the best artist, but they were, especially Michael, was able to communicate different things with his art. There was the 1989 earthquake, and I asked each gorilla to paint their reaction to the earthquake. Okay, I'm going to speed this up. And Michael took dark brown and just pounded the canvas and with some dark green. And then he took the light colored tan and brushed over the whole thing. Coco, on the other hand, painted fire because Joanne Tanner, who was with her during the quake, told me that she was very worried about her son who was home alone in case a fire broke out. They also create images that are recognizable, and Michael even images that move. This is his dog, Apple Chase, and that image just seems to me to move. Coco also interested in music. Peter Gabriel visited. Coco very charmed. And I'm going to just go here to some other things we tried out. And Demi had a language board. I read him each of the words after it was created. The next morning, there was something missing. And the one that was missing was the icon for go. This was done in about 2005, and he didn't want to see that. We have dogs that have language boards, Ricky and Red, and the curious thing about them is that they both did something independently, different time. They were raised at different times in different places, one at my home, one at the foundation. They both removed the icon for bad and tried to destroy it. I rescued the one from Ricky before it got too bad. There are folks out there using sign language with dogs, and we did things like take lids from containers and make word cards out of them, and here's one that says, "More books, please." We took cute little cards made for kids. We took inspiration cards, and Coco left this one, "I love being me," which I thought was kind of cool. And for the end of this, Coco has been asked some big questions by people, reporters and curiosity seekers, and she's got answers to these questions. And some people in Europe made a T-shirt with another woman on it, in quotes. I thought it was cool. So, in summary, we would love to see institutions holding gorillas and other great apes recognizing the benefits of two-way communication, recognizing their intelligence, that interspecies bonds are meaningful, and also to acknowledge their individual differences. And we feel that we can offer, we don't have time for this, but if you want to go to our website, you can see Coco's contribution to the Paris conference, the climate conference. I taught her one sign that she didn't have, protect, that she ended up using, but she also asked that cats be saved.
To work.
So you may be wondering what's actually going on inside there. And here we have another musician. This is the French horn player, is that correct?
No, composer.
Oh, no, composer. Oh, right. So who's the French horn player? Oh, dear me. Okay. Oh, okay, we got, oh, dear. Well, but David Sulzer, right. Well, it's a beautiful instrument.
And, and they're really in tune.
Gorgeous.
The rest of us are out of tune.
But anyway, so David's going to tell us a little more from a neuroscientist perspective.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Peter, and thank all of you for putting this together, and you. This is a great meeting. Yeah, I am a neuroscientist, so I usually work with electrophysiology and brain synapses, but I'm also a musician, and I appreciate the chance to talk about some of the projects which unite the two. This is your local bird for you Bostonians. It's really a great virtuoso. And songbirds haven't really come up too much so far today. This is an approach that was developed in Fernando Nottebohm's lab. I believe Marcello works with Nottebohm. Particularly Ofer Janowski, who's at Hunter College, figured out how to do this. Linda Wildbricht and Doug Rapetto worked with me on this project. But here's a zebrafinch. And the zebrafinches, as Ofer showed, will play the sounds of their fathers over and over again. There we go. So you just saw that he's triggering a little lever which allows him to play back the song of his father. So Linda and I were wondering, well, would they play for other things too? And we found that caged zebrafinch, none of this work that I'm about to show you is funded by NIH or anything. The birds were in my house, and we took zebrafinches, which are songbirds that do very well in captivity, and found that if we made a row of these triggers, they'll play them hundreds of times a day. Now, they'll do it to trigger other species. There's no reward involved other than them hearing the sounds. Of course, they're caged birds, and they're somewhat bored. They will play other birds, but here it's fun to hear them play. They seem to like human sounds when the sounds are similar to zebrafinches. Can I hear this? There is no sound coming through, which is really a shame. There we go. So these are the zebrafinches triggering the sounds of trombones and trumpets, which they like. If you put a punk rock band on there, they play it once and they run away. Same thing with canaries. It's funny because they often will put canaries and zebrafinches in the same. Triggering gamelan. They seem to like, let's turn off the trumpets and on the gamelan. So they'll sit here hitting these things and essentially compose for gamelan or trumpets and trombones, and they'll do this for hours a day. Now, it's actually kind of some nice compositions, but they are natural musicians. Now, thinking more about what can we do with songbirds, because we don't really have to train them to be musicians, right? They already do this quite well. So what could we do if we wanted to go further? Well, one question is, these are caged birds. We know why the caged bird sings. Do we know, would wild birds do this as well? Ofer is convinced that they certainly would, particularly ones like mockingbirds that have a large vocal vocabulary. To do this, we want to make instruments which are ergonomic, the ones we used. So I'll be showing you elephants and you've already seen toothed whales use their beaks, and dolphins, and these. So we're not used to thinking of playing instruments with our nose, but this is what's ergonomic for many of these other animals. It's not limited to that. We could use bar presses, for instance, perching, different ways to trigger sound. Probably the wild birds would do this. It's interesting to measure changes with time and learning, because they do change. They'll start off one day with relatively conservative choices. If you give them a choice of different sounds, after a couple of hours, they'll start to branch out, and their music, if you will, becomes different. So the taste changes with time and learning, and it would be interesting to have ways that birds could program their own sounds and not just be limited to the ones that we prepare as samples. Okay, going on to the elephants. So we just heard a lot about painting. The gorillas are much more expressive painters than the elephants, but the elephants have become as sort of a cottage industry in Thailand, raising a lot of money. This work is all done at the original conservation center, and there are now 100 conservation centers all through Thailand. This is the first one, and it's near Lampang. It's owned by the government. And the work was initiated also with Richard Lair and Komar and Melamed. So that's a painting elephant. If we had a little more time, I'd play this for you. We always think in one direction, but Vitaly Komar, who comes from the classic Russian painting tradition, realized that Kandinsky, sort of the father of avant-garde art, learned to make these designs in part by watching the elephant at the Berlin Zoo, who, like a century later, the elephant in the Cincinnati Zoo would get bored and would take up a stick or the trunk and make patterns and draw in the ground. So there's a nice little story here. If somebody asks about it in the questions, we can play it. But Kandinsky would go to the Berlin Zoo, watch the elephant, and this apparently had some influence on the beginning of the abstract art tradition. So the work I'm going to show you with the Elephant Orchestra, again, all done at the Thai Elephant Conservation Center, all with the collaboration of the conservationist Richard Lair, and it's for the Thai government. They've recorded 3 records, 3 CDs, and we've developed over 20 instruments, including string and wind instruments. This is the entry to the Thai Elephant Conservation Center, the first conservation center for the preservation of the domesticated elephant in Southeast Asia. So it's mostly in the woods, as you can see over here. This is clearing that we use as the recording studio. You can see some of the instruments over here. Again, it's very important to make ergonomic instruments, but here, where it was important for us to get the Thai people interested in elephant conservation, we wanted to make the instruments sound Thai, not sound like a bunch of Americans that came in to, tell them what they should listen to. So the music in that part of Thailand is a pentatonic scale, a 5-note scale that's, if you go to northern Thailand, you'll hear it everywhere. So this is how I made the renats. This is a metal xylophone pointing over here, and worked out the scale so it would be the same scale and it would sound familiar to them, but also to the elephants, because these are domesticated elephants. They hear music all the time. They're sung to in the morning when they come from the forest. The mahouts have a string band, so they're surrounded by music and they're very familiar with music and the scale. This is the plan, and I built it with a fellow out of who has a workshop in Lampang. Here's Pratida playing the instrument, and you can see that they can hold the stick very well. So this is an ergonomic instrument for elephants. For instance, we also built a bunch of instruments that they would operate with their feet. They don't like to do that. So you have to see what works best for these animals. Of course, hitting drums, as you might imagine, drums are not so hard for elephants. Here he is with a stick. This may surprise you. They play harmonicas very easily with their trunks, and they'll walk around in the forest playing harmonicas, which was the first day I gave 15 harmonicas to elephants and waited for them in the forest for them to walk up from various parts of the woods. You hear harmonicas everywhere. It was quite an experience. This is tubular bells. They work very well for elephants. This is an instrument called the angalung, which is played by children in Southeast Asia. Everybody knows how to play them. This is the one that's being used. We no longer run the orchestra, quote, but the elephants will still play the instruments, and they do this for tourists and other things. And the mahouts have taught them a 32-note long piece that they play from memory. For me, and that's great for the tourists, but for me, it's more interesting to see what the elephants come up with on their own. So let's hear a little bit of this elephant music. I'm going to drag it up to an area where I know that there's some. Okay, here's a young elephant who's hardly knows how to play. This is relatively new. Can we please get some sound here and some action? Why do we not get this? I'm at MIT and I'm very embarrassed. Okay, here we are. Now this elephant is about 4 years old and has to be. You're hearing another elephant. There are 14 elephants playing right now, and we're going to give it to Jojo, who is a much more experienced elephant, as you'll see in a second. This is one long 10-minute piece, so we'll only hear a minute or two of it. And Jojo has no problem with this. So if you can imagine here, we have 14 elephants in that recording studio. Well, here they are. Here's a good shot. You can't even see all of them. Some of them are off camera. Playing a variety of instruments. there are a variety of techniques that I use to put the instruments together and make sure that they play in tune and that it's fun for the elephants. You notice two Homo sapiens there playing rain sticks. Turns out while they can play basses and vibraphones and harmonicas and many other instruments, rain sticks are just beyond the elephant. So we got two mahouts who work there at the center to do the rain stick. This piece is based on rain. And if we went further, very soon you'd hear them smashing enormous gongs, and this is more like a traditional sort of renat over here with the slats. Maybe just give you a few more seconds of this. Let's see if we can go a little further. Yeah, this is an instrument that you could see is quite ergonomic for elephants. So some are and some aren't. We build over 20 of them. Here's Luke Hope. Luke Hope loves to smash the hell out of the... It's very hard to get Luke Hope to stop when she wants to play. Sometimes you have to yank the thing from her, and you cannot yank anything out of an elephant trunk, believe me. So if she wants to, she'll pick it up and just keep playing. So sometimes they will stop spontaneously. Other times you really have to get them to work. Okay, so let's go ahead. Wanted to mention Roger and Katie Payne, and that one thing you have to also take into account is their hearing is somewhat different. They both range about an octave lower on either side than we do. They do seem to like to play music in sort of the regions you just heard, which are the sort of the sweet spot for us as well, but it's something we have to keep in mind. I want to mention this for the conservation. This is less a exploratory science project and more a conservation project. And just to make some points that Richard Lair, who's lived in Thailand for about 50 years now, would like to make. There's 3,700 domesticated elephants now in Thailand. It used to be 100,000 if you go back 100 years. They're mostly now, more and more, now that logging has gone, owned by wealthy citizens who are now putting them into tourism business. Now, I told you when Richard and the others started, the Conservation Center was the first one. There's about 60 elephants that live there. They're now up to 100. Now, how do they make their living? Well, point two, it's not from logging anymore. Logging is illegal and not likely to come back in our lifetime. So how are the elephants going to make a living? They eat 400 pounds a day. There's 3,700 of them. So what's happening right now is wealthy individuals are buying them, starting up commercial. What you saw before was the government elephant conservation centers, commercial centers. And and who pays for this? Well, even though we made the instruments Thai, it's really Chinese tourists. There are very few people coming in from Europe and the Americas, mostly Chinese people. And what the concern is here is now elephants are completely dependent on Chinese tourism. And if there's anything like a SARS epidemic or something coming up there's a looming catastrophe because there is no other support for these animals in Southeast Asia, and it's something we have to consider. Last thing I want to leave with is just something you've already seen before that Diane Reese showed. Taking this approach, if it is interesting, is certainly going to be possible also with toothed whales, and particularly, she didn't show this video, but many of you probably know it, and she did talk about this. So you can use this for the playback of the sounds, of the whistles, and I'm sure that you can also use this for playback of music. Will they respond hundreds of times a day like songbirds, or will they sit around jamming with each other like elephants? No idea, but interesting project. Dan, we've talked about this for about 12 years. One day, I have to give it a shot. Okay, thank you very much.
I think we have time for about 5 questions. Is it possible to start a little further back on the screen, or am I able to? Because I know there were questions coming in for Roger at the beginning. Roger, okay, let's do one for everyone. Do you want to have a look at the questions?
I remember one of them, Peter.
Yeah.
which was how could you teach an animal words for various emotions. When you're studying songs of whales, for example, you have absolutely no idea as to what is the important level to analyze the sounds. Maybe the whole song is nothing but sort of like a carrier frequency for all sorts of minute little changes which are taking place. So in the end, you despair and simply try analyzing something. You decide, okay, this will be our criteria for choosing a particular sound, and we'll call it a unit and so on. And when you make an analysis of that sort, oh my God, suddenly very interesting things drop out. So now you try it on other songs that you hear, and pretty soon you have a whole construct, and you consider that the analysis of song. It may be totally wrong from beginning to end because it's nothing but the carrier frequency and how they're handling that. I'm suggesting that you get an animal into a situation which is clearly going to make it jealous or angry or amorous towards some other individual that it clearly is attracted to, and you make an assumption from pure ignorance as to what that actually might mean. And with that assumption, you then do more analyses until you decide, okay, this is a consistent response which occurs in these situations which I believe are frustrating for the animal. Maybe you're totally wrong, but you will get some sort of an answer which enables you to work within the human construct of what you believe it means and see if you get interesting answers. Sorry, that's a very long answer.
Okay, thank you. So Patricia, hold on. Was Aza one? That's good. That's it. There's one. How can AI deal with olfactory or pheromonal means of communication?
You chose the hardest of the questions.
Choose another.
I saw one go by about like how much data is actually required. For the 2018 paper that was translated and completely unsupervised from audio in one language to text in another language, that required is between 200 to 400 hours of human spoken language. I haven't seen the ablation studies yet to figure out what is the minimum number of texts, tokens that you need. I just don't think people have done that study yet. The second one here on anthropomorphism, does that get in the way of understanding interspecies communication? I always think this is a really interesting question, because there's like, you don't want to overread too much into the experience of another animal and what their actions mean, but ignoring any kind of conserved experience between animals is, I think, another form of human exceptionalism. And so I think there's a fine line to walk between both of those things.
Okay, thank you. Can we move down again? Or are we running out of time here? There was one about Coco, I think saying, take a single painting of an earthquake. If we know it is by a gorilla, will we like it more or less?
Will we like it?
Yeah.
I guess I'm not sure.
Oh, maybe that's. What about, was Coco happier because of her ability to directly communicate?
I think that it was something that she enjoyed. She was very chatty.
Yeah.
The two males, more the strong silent type, unless they had something to really talk about that was important to them.
Great. Okay. Fantastic. David, how often do the elephants make mistakes when performing?
Oh, we don't think of it as being a mistake.
No, right. Okay, sure.
If they play it, it's right.
That's right. This is jazz. There are no mistakes.
They never make mistakes.
No, they never miss. Right.
Memorize pieces, they'll make mistakes.
No, okay, sure. Okay, can we move again, or are we out of time, do you think? Oh, we are at 0. I think...
There's a question about brain-computer interfaces.
Oh, would anyone like to respond on brain-computer interface?
I wouldn't mind responding to the
please.
couple of people that are
Yeah,
talking about the threats to the elephants. Somebody on there said, you only get them to play with bull hooks, and that's absolutely not true. I don't know who said that, but that impression is incorrect, and they will play spontaneously, and you don't need a bull hook to make an elephant play. Usually you walk up and say, play, and they say yes or no. So I understand people are very attuned to animal cruelty, and I don't mind people bringing that up, but you should understand that that's not the facts. Thank you.
I think one of the hopes for this meeting was that we would have a lot of different points of view, and they would all be expressed with intensity.
So on the brain-computer interface
Yeah.
side, one of the reasons why we show at the very end that being able to reconstruct what somebody sees from fMRI data is because when we dream, our visual cortex is essentially going in the inverse direction. That's why we see things when we dream. So, that means within our lifetime, probably within the next 10, 15 years, we're going to start to be able to decode what we humans are dreaming about. But of course, then you immediately apply it to animals if you can get them into an fMRI. And then we get to see what animals are dreaming about. And that to me is an incredibly powerful story.
And what we're working with now are how do we utilize the constraints that we have to be as efficient as possible. So sperm whales are a great example where, because they dive deep under the water and they use clicks to both communicate and navigate, it's a great way to use sound as a stepping point into the space. Again, not the totality of the research that's being done.
I think it's going to take a lot more than 10 or 15 years till we know what you're dreaming about. Even with fMRI, I think you're going to need something far more invasive. But I'm willing to make a public bet with both of you.
Cool.
You guys have a lot more money than I do, and let's make an interesting bet. But I think you're going to have to, maybe with epilepsy patients, but that's about as far as you're going to get in the next 10, 15 years. fMRI is too slow and too cloudy.
What's an interesting thing to bet?
Yeah, let's think about that.
Cool.
Yeah, Mary Lou Jepsen has some great stuff.
Well, I was going to say Mary Lou Jepsen's thing is very lightweight and less intrusive, more like a hat, a soft hat. So there are, and I think, well, there are many things we're going to learn from that, but it's been an amazing panel. We have some extraordinary people here. Please thank the second team.